Never really know the moment your life is about to change. Sometimes it's a whisper, sometimes it's a storm. For me, it was a Thursday morning, a conference room full of familiar faces, and a single sentence that would burn itself into my memory forever. My name is Ava Sinclair. For years, I was the woman who got things done, the fixer, the late night emailer, the one who made the impossible look easy. I thought I knew what power looked like. I thought I knew who I was. But that day, when my boss tried to erase me in front of everyone, I learned something new. Sometimes the only way to take back your story is to write a new ending. And that's exactly what I did. You never forget the moment someone tries to erase you. Not just quietly, not in a closed-door meeting with HR and a box of tissues, but in front of everyone. Your team, your peers, the people who used to look up to you. That's the kind of humiliation that doesn't just sting, it brands you. I can still feel the heat of it, even now, months later, sitting in an office that smells like new paints, old money, looking out over a city that once felt like a cage and now feels like a chessboard. It was a Thursday. Thursdays are supposed to be harmless, aren't they? The week's almost over, the weekend's in sight, and you're just trying to keep your head down and your inbox under control. But that Thursday, I walked into the weekly leadership sync with my usual stock of reports, a fresh coffee, and the kind of optimism that only comes from not knowing you're about to be blindsided. The conference room was already full. My team, operations, finance, HR, even a couple of the new hires from marketing were all there, faces lit by the blue glow of the overhead projector. And at the head of the table, in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, was Marcus. Marcus with his perfect hair and his perfect teeth and his perfect predatory smile. The kind of man who never learned to whisper because he never had to. I'd worked for Marcus for almost 4 years, long enough to know that he liked to make an entrance, but not long enough to see this coming. He waited until I'd finished my update, Q2 numbers, supply chain improvements, and a new vendor contract I'd spent weeks negotiating. I was proud of that contract. It was the kind of deal that would save the company 6 figures a year, maybe more. I'd barely finished my last sentence when Marcus stood up, smoothed his tie, and cleared his throat. Thank you, Ava. That was thorough, but I think it's time for a change. The room went silent. You could hear the HVAC humming and the faint tap of someone's pen against a notepad. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, then to him, then back to me. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Effective immediately, he said. Ava will be stepping down as Director of Operations. She'll be transitioning to a new role, Senior Project Analyst. It's a better fit for her skill set. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at him, willing myself not to blink, not to flinch, and not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. My team looked at me, then at their laptops, then at the floor. No one said a word. Not even Julia, who made Mentored since her first day. Not even Ben, who owed me his last promotion. Silence, like a verdict. He kept talking, something about organizational realignment and leveraging core competencies, but I didn't hear it. All I heard was the blood rushing in my ears and the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and furious. I felt my hands go cold, my face flush. I wanted to scream, to throw my coffee in his face, to walk out and never look back. But I didn't. I just nodded, gathered my things, and left the room. I made it to the stairwell before the tears came. Not big, dramatic sobs, just a few hot, angry drops that I wiped away with the back of my hand. I took the stairs down, 1 flight, 2, 3, until I found myself in the lobby, staring at the marble floor, the security desk, and the revolving doors. I'd walked through those doors every day for almost a decade. I'd built my career in that building brick by brick. Late nights and early mornings, missed birthdays and canceled vacations. And now, just like that, I was being erased. I called my sister. She answered on the first ring. Ava, what's wrong? I tried to keep my voice steady. He demoted me in front of everyone. There was a pause. Then quietly, I'm so sorry. I wanted to say something brave, something defiant, but all I could manage was, I don't know what to do. She didn't offer advice. She just listened, the way she always did. When I finally hung up, I felt a little steadier. Not strong, not yet, but steady enough to walk back upstairs, pack up my office, and face the music. The next few days were a blur. HR meetings, exit interviews, awkward conversations in the break room. People avoided my gaze, whispered in the hallways, and sent me LinkedIn requests with vague messages about staying in touch. I smiled, nodded, and played the part. But inside, I was burning. I spent the weekend in my apartment, blinds drawn, phone off, replaying the scene in my head. The humiliation, the betrayal, the way Marcus had looked at me, like I was nothing, like I was already gone. I thought about quitting, about moving to another city, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just at Marcus, but at myself, for letting him do this to me, for letting him win. By Sunday night, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to fight. But not the way he expected. Not with angry emails or HR complaints or desperate pleas for my old job back. No, I was going to play his game, and I was going to win. I started with research. Late nights, early mornings, spreadsheets, and property records and corporate filings. I learned everything there was to know about the building. Who owned it, who managed it, what it was worth, and what it would take to buy it. I called in favors, reached out to old contacts, and made appointments with brokers and bankers and lawyers. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my friends, not my family, not even my sister. This was mine. My plan, my revenge, my redemption. By the end of the month, I had a plan. A real, actionable, terrifying plan. I was going to buy the building. The whole damn thing. The place where Marcus had humiliated me, where he thought he held all the power. I was going to own it. And when I did, he would have to answer to me. The first step was the hardest, convincing myself I could actually do it. I wasn't a billionaire. I didn't have a trust fund or a secret inheritance waiting in the wings. What I had was a decade of experience, a network of people who owed me favors, and a stubbornness that bordered on pathological. I started by calling an old friend from business school, someone who'd gone into commercial real estate while I'd been climbing the corporate ladder. Her name was Priya, and she was the kind of person who could turn a handshake into a signed contract before you'd even finished your coffee. We met at a little cafe downtown, the kind with exposed brick and overpriced lattes. I told her everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the part about revenge, about Marcus, about the humiliation that still kept me up at night. I just said I was looking for an investment, something stable, something with potential. She listened, nodded, asked a few pointed questions, then she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "You know, Ava, I always thought you'd end up running your own show. Maybe this is your chance." I smiled back, but inside I was terrified. This wasn't just a business deal. This was personal. This was about taking back control, about proving to myself and to Marcus that I was more than just a line on an org chart. Priya agreed to help. She put me in touch with a broker, a sharp-eyed woman named Leela, who knew every inch of commercial real estate in the city. Leela was a force of nature, fast-talking, relentless, and utterly unflappable. She didn't blink when I told her which building I was interested in. She just nodded, made a few calls, and within a week, I had a meeting with the current owners. The building was owned by a holding company, a faceless entity with a board of directors scattered across 3 states and 2 countries. They didn't care about Marcus or me or the drama that had played out in the conference room. They cared about numbers, occupancy rates, maintenance costs, return on investment. I spent hours poring over financial statements, inspection reports, lease agreements. I learned more about HVAC systems and elevator maintenance than I ever wanted to know. The negotiations were brutal. The owners wanted more than I could afford, and I refused to overpay.
We went back and forth for weeks, each side digging in, each side convinced they could outlast the other. I lost sleep, skipped meals, snapped at my sister when she called to check in, but I didn't give up. Not now. Not ever. In the middle of all this, I still had to show up at work every day. My new role, senior project analyst, was a joke. I was given busy work, meaningless reports, projects that went nowhere. Marcus barely acknowledged me. When he did, it was with a smirk or a condescending pat on the back. My team avoided me, afraid to be seen with the company pariah. I felt invisible, but I refused to disappear. I started spending my lunch breaks in the building's lobby, watching the people come and go. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the afternoon sun hit the marble floors, the smell of fresh coffee from the cafe, the security guard who always nodded when I walked by. I imagined what it would feel like to own this place, to walk through those doors not as an employee, but as the landlord. The thought kept me going. One night, after another round of negotiations, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. I was exhausted, anxious, and more than a little scared. What if this didn't work? What if I failed? What if Marcus found out what I was doing and used it against me? But then I remembered that Thursday. The look on his face, the sound of his voice as he stripped me of my title in front of everyone. I remembered the humiliation, the anger, the burning need to prove him wrong. And I knew I couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. The holding company was under pressure. One of their other properties had lost a major tenant, and they needed cash fast. Leela called me late on a Friday night, her voice buzzing with excitement. "They're ready to deal, Ava. If you can move quickly, the building is yours." I barely slept that weekend. I called Priya, called my bank, called every contact I had who might be willing to invest. I put together a proposal, a financing plan, a vision for the building's future. I was relentless, persuasive, maybe even a little desperate. But it worked. By Monday morning, I had the funding lined up, the paperwork ready, the deal on the table. The closing took place in a bland conference room on the 22nd floor with a view of the city skyline and a stack of documents that seemed to go on forever. I signed my name more times than I could count, my hand shaking just a little with each signature. When it was over, Leela handed me a set of keys. Real, physical keys, heavy and cold in my palm. "Congratulations, Ava," she said, grinning. "You own the building." I walked out of that conference room feeling lighter than I had in months. I had done it. I had actually done it. I owned the building. The place where Marcus had tried to erase me was now mine, and I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The first thing I did was walk the building. Alone. After hours. I wanted to feel every inch of it. To let the reality of what I'd done settle into my bones. The hallways were quiet. The offices dark, except for the glow of exit signs and the occasional flicker of a computer left on overnight. I ran my fingers along the walls, the cool glass of the windows, and the polished brass of the elevator buttons. This was mine now. Every square foot, every corner, every memory, good and bad, belonged to me. I stopped outside the conference room where Marcus had demoted me. The lights were off, but I could see my reflection in the glass. Tired, determined, and a little older than I remembered. I thought about all the meetings I'd led in that room, all the late nights and early mornings, the victories and defeats. I thought about the people who'd sat around that table, some still here, some long gone. I thought about Marcus, his smug smile and his careless cruelty. And I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone make me feel small in my own space again. The next morning, I arrived early, before most of the tenants had even unlocked their doors. I stood in the lobby, watching the building come to life. The cleaning crew finished their rounds, the security guard nodded at me, and the first wave of employees trickled in, coffee in hand, eyes still heavy with sleep. I felt a strange sense of power, Not the kind that comes from a title or a corner office, but the kind that knows you've taken control of your own story. I didn't announce my ownership right away. I wanted to do things right, to make a plan, to be strategic. I met with the property management team, reviewed the leases, and learned the names of every tenant, every vendor, and every contractor. I listened more than I spoke, asked questions, and took notes. I wanted to understand what worked, what didn't, and what could be better. I wasn't just here to own the building. I was here to make it thrive. Meanwhile, at work, nothing had changed. Marcus still strutted around like he owned the place, still ignored me in meetings, still handed me pointless assignments, and expected me to smile. But I didn't care anymore. I had a secret, a power he couldn't touch. Every time I walked past his office, every time I sat in the break room, every time I rode the elevator to my new, smaller cubicle, I smiled to myself. He had no idea what was coming. I started making small changes to the building. Nothing dramatic, just enough to get people talking. I upgraded the coffee machines in the lobby, added fresh flowers to the reception desk, brought in a local bakery to supply pastries on Fridays. I sent out a survey to all the tenants, asking for feedback, suggestions, ideas. The responses poured in. Some practical, some ambitious, some downright hilarious. But the message was clear. People wanted to feel valued, to feel like they mattered. I made it my mission to deliver. I negotiated better rates with the cleaning crew, improved the Wi-Fi, added a bike rack out front for the cyclists. I even started a monthly tenant breakfast where people from different companies could mingle, share ideas, build connections. The building started to feel different. Warmer, more alive, more like a community than just a collection of offices. Word started to spread. People noticed the changes, the improvements, the sense of energy in the air. I got emails from tenants I'd never met, thanking me for listening, for caring, for making their workdays a little brighter. It was a small thing, but it meant everything to me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was making a difference. But I knew the real test was still to come. Sooner or later, Marcus would find out. Sooner or later, he'd realize that the building he took for granted, the building he thought he controlled, was now in my hands. I didn't know how he would react, but I was ready. I'd spent too long letting other people write my story. It was time to take the pen back. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I got a call from the property manager. Marcus's company was up for lease renewal, and there were some issues. Maintenance requests that had gone unanswered, complaints about the HVAC, rumors that they were considering moving to a newer, flashier building across town. The property manager wanted to know how I wanted to handle it. I thought about it for a long time. I could make things difficult for Marcus, raise the rent, refuse to address the maintenance issues, push him out the door. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. I wanted to win, yes, but I wanted to do it on my own terms. I wanted to prove that I was better than him, not just smarter or tougher, but kinder, more principled. So I called a meeting. I invited Marcus and his team to my office, not the one I'd been demoted to, but the new one, the one with my name on the door and a view of the city. I watched his face as he walked in, confusion giving way to shock, then something else. Fear, maybe? Or respect. I introduced myself as the new owner of the building, explained my vision, outlined the improvements I'd made, and the plans I had for the future. Marcus tried to play it cool, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He asked about the lease, about the rent, about the maintenance issues. I answered every question, calmly, professionally, without a hint of the anger or bitterness I still felt. I offered him a fair deal, better than he deserved, because I wanted him to know that I was in control now, not just of the building, but of my own destiny. When the meeting was over, Marcus stood up, shook my hand, and looked me in the eye for the first time in months. "Congratulations, Ava," he said, his voice tight. I smiled. A real smile this time. "Thank you, Marcus. I intend to." After that meeting, something shifted. Not just in Marcus, but in me. For the first time since that humiliating Thursday, I felt free. I'd spent so long letting his opinion of me shape my own, letting his power define my limits, but now, every time I walked through the lobby, every time I greeted a tenant or signed a contract, I felt the weight of his judgment lift, replaced by something lighter, fiercer, and more alive. I was no longer the woman who'd been demoted in front of her peers. I was the woman who'd bought the building out from under her boss. But freedom, I learned, comes with its own set of challenges. Owning the building meant more than just collecting rent and making improvements. It meant responsibility. It meant late-night calls about broken pipes, early morning emails about parking disputes, endless meetings with contractors and city inspectors. It meant learning to balance budgets, negotiate contracts, manage people, not just employees, but also tenants, vendors, neighbors. It was overwhelming at times, exhausting at others. But it was mine. Every problem, every victory, every sleepless night belonged to me. I threw myself into the work. I learned everything I could about property management, commercial leasing, tenant relations. I read books, took online courses, joined industry groups. I asked questions, made mistakes, learned from them. I built relationships with the people who kept the building running, the janitors, the security guards, the maintenance crew. I made sure they knew they were valued, that their work mattered. I brought them coffee, remembered their birthdays, listened to their stories. Slowly, the building began to feel less like a collection of strangers and more like a community. My favorite part of the day became the early mornings, before the rush, when the building was quiet and the city was just waking up. I'd walk the halls, check on the common areas, and make a mental list of things to fix or improve. Sometimes I'd stop by the rooftop, watch the sunrise over the skyline, and let myself dream a little. I thought about what the building could become. A place where people wanted to work, where they felt inspired, connected, supported. A place that reflected not just my ambition, but also my values. Of course, not everyone was happy about the changes. Some tenants grumbled about the new policies, the increased security, the stricter maintenance schedules. A few tried to push back, to test my resolve. But I stood firm. I listened to their concerns, addressed what I could, but I didn't let anyone bully me or take advantage. I'd spent too many years letting people like Marcus walk all over me. Those days were over. Marcus, for his part, kept his distance. He renewed the lease, paid the rent on time, kept his complaints to a minimum. I saw him in the lobby sometimes or in the elevator, but our interactions were brief, professional, almost cordial. I could tell he was still trying to figure me out, still trying to understand how I'd managed to turn the tables. Part of me wanted to gloat, to rub his nose in it, but I resisted the urge. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had something better. Self-respect. As the months passed, the building flourished. Occupancy rates went up, tenant satisfaction improved, word spread about the new owner who actually cared. I started getting calls from other property owners asking for advice, offering partnerships. I even got a few offers to buy the building at a significant profit. But I wasn't interested in selling. Not yet. This was more than an investment. It was a statement, a declaration that I was here to stay. My personal life, too, began to heal. My sister, who had been my rock through it all, came to visit one weekend. We walked the building together, laughing about old memories, making plans for the future. She told me she was proud of me, that she'd never doubted I'd land on my feet. I believed her, for the first time in a long time. One evening, as I was locking up my office, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from Julia, the young analyst I'd mentored years ago. She'd left the company after my demotion, moved on to a new job, but she'd heard about what I'd done. The note was short, but it meant the world to me. Ava, you showed me what it means to fight for yourself. Thank you for being the kind of leader I want to become. I sat at my desk for a long time after reading that, the city lights twinkling outside my window. I thought about all the women who'd come before me, who had fought and lost, and kept going anyway. I hoped in some small way I'd made it a little easier for them. But I knew the story wasn't over. Success, I'd learned, is never final. There are always new challenges, new obstacles, new battles to fight. But I was ready. I'd face the worst and come out stronger. I'd turn humiliation into triumph, loss into ownership, fear into power. And as I turned off the lights and stepped into the quiet hallway, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, I was ready to meet it head on. Because this was my building now. My story. My life. And I was just getting started.
Owning the building changed the way I saw everything. My career, my relationships, even myself. I started to realize that the power I'd been chasing all those years wasn't about titles or corner offices or even the respect of people like Marcus. It was about agency, about having the freedom to make my own choices, to shape my own destiny, to build something that mattered. That realization was both liberating and a little terrifying. For the first time, there was no one to blame if things went wrong. No Marcus, no corporate politics, no glass ceiling. Just me and the choices I made every day. I poured myself into the work, but I also started to make space for other things I'd neglected for years. I reconnected with old friends, took my sister on a weekend trip to the coast, started painting again in the evenings just for the joy of it. I even signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. It felt strange at first, carving out time for myself, but it also felt necessary, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I'd lost along the way. The building became a reflection of that process. As I invested in renovations and improvements, I found myself thinking not just about profit margins and occupancy rates, but about the kind of environment I wanted to create. I added a meditation room on the top floor, a quiet space with soft lighting and floor cushions where anyone could escape for a few minutes apiece. I commissioned a local artist to paint a mural in the lobby, something bold and colorful that made people smile when they walked in. I started a scholarship fund for the children of building staff, a small gesture that meant more to me than any quarterly report. The tenants noticed. People started stopping me in the hallways, not just to complain about a leaky faucet or a broken printer, but to say thank you, to tell me how much they appreciated the changes, how much better the building felt. It was a kind of feedback I'd never experienced in my old corporate life. Immediate, genuine, human. It made all the late nights and early mornings worth it. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were setbacks, unexpected repairs, a difficult tenant who refused to pay rent, a burst pipe that flooded half the basement. There were days when I questioned my sanity, when I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But every time I faced a new challenge, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I wasn't the woman who'd been blindsided in a conference room anymore. I was the owner, the leader, the architect of my own future. One afternoon, as I was reviewing renovation plans in my office, I got a call from Lila, my broker. She sounded excited, almost breathless. Ava, you're not going to believe this. There's a company interested in leasing the entire top floor. They're a tech startup, growing fast, looking for a flagship location. They love what you've done with the building. I felt a surge of pride, followed by a wave of nerves. This was the kind of opportunity that could take the building to the next level, but it was also a risk. I scheduled a meeting with the startup's founders, two women in their early 30s, sharp and ambitious and full of ideas. We sat in the conference room, the same one where Marcus had tried to erase me, and talked about their vision, their needs, their dreams for the space. As I listened to them, I saw a reflection of myself. Years ago, before the cynicism, before the disappointments, before Marcus, I wanted to help them succeed, to give them the kind of support I'd always wished for.
We negotiated a fair lease with flexible terms and room to grow. When we signed the contract, they hugged me, laughing and crying at the same time. "You have no idea what this means to us," one of them said. "You're the first landlord who's ever treated us like partners, not just tenants." I smiled, feeling something shift inside me. Maybe this was what I was meant to do. Not just own a building, but build a legacy. Create a space where people could thrive, where dreams could take root, where no one ever had to feel small or powerless. That night, I walked the building one more time. The hall's quiet, the city lights glowing outside the windows. I thought about Marcus, about the humiliation, about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the risks I'd taken, the battles I'd fought, the victories and the scars. And I realized that in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my story, about turning pain into power, about building something that would outlast any one person, any one setback. I stood in the lobby looking up at the mural and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I was home. I was whole, and I was ready for whatever came next.
The seasons changed, and with them, so did the rhythm of the building. Spring brought a rush of new tenants, small businesses, creative agencies, a nonprofit that worked with at-risk youth. The lobby filled with fresh faces, new energy, and the kind of hopeful chatter that only comes when people believe in possibility. I made it a point to introduce myself to everyone, to learn their names, to ask about their work. It wasn't just about being a good landlord. It was about building a community, one conversation at a time. I started hosting monthly mixers in the lobby, casual gatherings with coffee and pastries, sometimes wine and cheese if the mood struck. At first, people were shy, sticking to their own groups. But over time, the walls came down. I watched as a marketing firm partnered with a tech startup, as a law office offered pro bono help to the nonprofit, as friendships formed over shared elevator rides and late-night deadlines. The building was becoming more than just a place to work. It was becoming a network, a support system, a home from home. One evening, after a particularly lively mixer, I found myself alone in the lobby, tidying up empty cups and napkins. The security guard, a quiet man named Luis, stopped by to help. We chatted about his family, his plans for the weekend, the soccer team his son played on. As we talked, I realized how much I'd come to value these small moments, the connections, the stories, the sense of belonging. It was a far cry from the cold transactional world I'd left behind. But even as the building thrived, I couldn't escape the shadow of my past. Every so often, I'd see Marcus in the elevator or the parking garage, his expression guarded, his greetings clipped. He was still running his company, still playing the part of the big shot, but something had changed. The swagger was gone, replaced by a kind of wary respect. I wondered if he ever thought about that Thursday, about the way he'd tried to erase me. I wondered if he regretted it, or if he even remembered. One afternoon, as I was reviewing maintenance reports in my office, Marcus knocked on the door. I looked up, surprised. He hesitated in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes darting around the room. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat, silent for a moment, then cleared his throat. "I wanted to say, congratulations. You've done a lot with the building. People are happy. It's impressive." I studied him, searching for sarcasm, but found only sincerity. For the first time, I saw him not as an adversary, but as a man who'd made mistakes, who'd lost his way, who maybe, just maybe, was trying to make amends. "Thank you, Marcus," I said quietly. "That means a lot." He nodded, stood, and left without another word. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of relief and closure.
maybe this was what forgiveness looked like. Not forgetting, not excusing, but letting go. Releasing the anger, the hurt, the need to prove myself. I didn't need his approval anymore. I had my own. As summer approached, I decided to take a real vacation for the first time in years. I left the building in the capable hands of my team, packed a bag, and flew to Italy with my sister. We wandered cobblestone streets, ate too much gelato, laughed until our sides hurt. I let myself relax, to breathe, to remember that life was about more than work, more than buildings, more than old wounds. When I returned, the building was still standing, still thriving. My team had handled everything beautifully, and the tenants had barely noticed I was gone. It was a reminder that I didn't have to do it all myself, that I could trust others, that I could let go. I started thinking about the future, not just for the building, but for myself. I thought about expanding, about buying another property, about mentoring other women who wanted to break into the industry. I thought about writing a book, sharing my story, helping others find their own path to power. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about what lay ahead. One evening, as I locked up my office, I paused in the lobby, looking around at the space I'd transformed. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain, the struggle, the triumph. I thought about the people who'd helped me, the lessons I'd learned, the woman I'd become. And I realized that in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about Marcus, or the humiliation, or even the building itself. It was about reclaiming my story, about finding my voice, about building a life on my own terms. I smiled, turned off the lights, and stepped into the night, ready for whatever came next. Autumn arrived with a crispness in the air and a golden light that made the city look softer, almost forgiving. The building's windows reflected the changing leaves, and I found myself lingering in the lobby just to watch the afternoon sun slant across the marble. There was a sense of momentum now, a feeling that what I'd started was growing beyond me. The monthly mixers had become a tradition, and tenants began organizing their own events. Charity drives, lunchtime yoga, even a holiday decorating contest that turned the hallways into a riot of color and laughter. I started to see the building as a living thing, something that needed care and attention, but also space to evolve. I encouraged tenants to personalize their offices, to bring in plants, art, even pets on Fridays. The atmosphere shifted from corporate to creative, and I could feel the difference in the way people greeted each other, the way they lingered in the common areas, the way they smiled when they saw me. It was a far cry from the sterile, anxious energy that had once filled these halls. With the building running smoothly, I had more time to focus on the bigger picture. I began attending industry conferences, networking with other property owners, learning about sustainable building practices and new technologies. I met women who were breaking barriers in real estate, women who reminded me of myself, ambitious, resilient, determined to make their mark. We shared stories, strategies, and sometimes our scars. I realized how rare it was to find spaces where women could be honest about their struggles, where we could celebrate our wins without apology. Inspired, I started a mentorship program for young women interested in commercial real estate. I hosted workshops in the building's conference room, invited guest speakers, and paired mentees with experienced professionals. The first session was small, just 5 women, nervous but eager. By the end of the year, we had over 30 participants, and the energy in the room was electric. Watching them grow, seeing their confidence bloom was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Meanwhile, my relationship with my sister deepened. She became my sounding board, my confidant, the person I called when I needed advice or just a good laugh. We started a tradition of Sunday dinners, cooking together in my apartment, sharing stories from our week.
She told me about her own challenges at work, her dreams of starting a business, her fears and hopes. I realized how much I had missed these moments, how easy it was to lose sight of what really mattered when you're caught up in the grind. One Sunday evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights, she turned to me and said, "You know, Ava, I've never seen you this happy, not just successful, happy." I thought about that for a long moment. She was right. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because I'd won some battle or proved someone wrong, but because I'd found a way to live on my own terms. I'd built something real, something lasting, something that reflected who I was and what I valued. But happiness, I learned, doesn't mean the end of struggle. There were still hard days, tenants who broke leases, contractors who missed deadlines, and city inspectors who seemed to delight in finding the smallest code violations. There were moments of doubt, of exhaustion, of wondering if I was really cut out for this. But every time I faced a new challenge, I reminded myself of that Thursday, of the woman who'd walked out of the conference room with her head held high, determined to write her own story. One particularly difficult week, when everything seemed to go wrong at once, I found myself back in the conference room late at night, alone with my thoughts. I looked around at the empty chairs, the city lights twinkling outside, and felt a wave of gratitude for the journey, for the lessons, for the chance to start over. I realized that every setback, every failure, every moment of pain had brought me here, to this place, to this life. I took out my journal and started to write, not about the problems or the stress, but about the things I was proud of, the things I was grateful for, the people I had helped, the community I'd built, the woman I had become. By the time I finished, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter, the path ahead a little clearer. As I locked up and headed home, I thought about all the women who were still fighting their own battles, still waiting for their chance to shine. I hoped my story would give them courage and would remind them that it's never too late to take control, to start again, to build something beautiful from the ashes of disappointment.
Winter crept in quietly, frosting the city's rooftops and turning the building's glass facade into a canvas for morning sunlight. The holidays brought a new kind of energy, with tenants decorating their doors, exchanging cookies and cards, laughter echoing down the hallways. I organized a building-wide charity drive, collecting coats and toys for families in need. The response was overwhelming. Boxes piled up in the lobby, and for the first time, I saw tenants from rival companies working side by side, sorting donations, sharing stories, and even making plans to volunteer together. The sense of community was real, tangible, and it filled me with a pride I'd never known in my old corporate life. But as the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey from humiliation to ownership, from isolation to connection, and from anger to peace. I thought about Marcus, about the way he'd tried to shrink me, to make me doubt my worth. I thought about the countless women who'd been dismissed, overlooked, or pushed aside, and how easy it would have been to let that moment define me. But I hadn't. I'd chosen a different path, a harder one maybe, but one that was mine. One evening, after the last tenant had left and the building was quiet, I wandered the halls, letting the silence settle around me. I paused outside the old conference room, the place where it had all started. I opened the door, stepped inside, and sat at the head of the table. The room felt different now, smaller, less intimidating, almost familiar. I closed my eyes and let myself remember the sting of Marcus's words, the heat of humiliation, the cold determination that had followed. I let myself feel it all, then let it go. I realized then that the real victory wasn't in owning the building or outsmarting Marcus. It was in reclaiming my sense of self, in refusing to let anyone else define my value. It was in the quiet confidence that came from knowing I could survive, adapt, and thrive, no matter what. that I could build something lasting, not just for myself, but for everyone who walked through these doors. The next morning, I called a meeting with my team. We gathered in the lobby, coffee in hand, bundled in scarves and coats against the winter chill. I thanked them for their hard work, their dedication, their belief in the vision we'd created together. I told them how proud I was, not just of the building, but of the community we'd built. I reminded them that every small act of kindness, every moment of connection mattered, that we were more than just colleagues, we were a family. After the meeting, I received an email from Julia, the analyst I'd mentored. She'd been promoted at her new company, leading a team of her own. She wrote to thank me for believing in her, for showing her what was possible. Her words brought tears to my eyes. I realized that the impact we have on others often goes beyond what we can see, that every act of courage, every stand we take ripples outward, inspiring others to do the same. As the new year approached, I set new goals, not just for the building, but for myself. I wanted to keep growing, keep learning, keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible. I wanted to help more women break into the industry, to create more spaces where people felt seen, valued, and empowered. I wanted to keep building, not just structures, but legacies. On the New Year's Eve, I stood on the rooftop watching fireworks light up the sky. My sister was by my side, laughing, her arm around my shoulders. I thought about the year behind me, the pain, the triumph, the transformation. I thought about the year ahead, the challenges and opportunities waiting just out of sight. And I felt ready to face whatever came next, to keep writing my story, to keep building a life on my own terms. As the clock struck midnight, I made a promise to myself to never let anyone else hold the pen, to own my story, my power, my future, to keep moving forward no matter what.
The new year brought a fresh sense of purpose. I dove into projects with renewed energy, determined to make the building not just a place to work, but a place where people could grow. I launched a professional development series, lunch and learns, guest speakers, networking events, open to all tenants and their employees. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. People from different companies mingled over sandwiches and coffee, sharing ideas, forming partnerships, and even launching new ventures together. The building was becoming a hub of innovation, a place where ambition and community went hand in hand. I also started working with local schools, offering internships and job shadowing opportunities for students interested in business, real estate, and entrepreneurship. Watching those young faces light up as they toured the building, asked questions, and imagined their own futures was a reminder of why I'd fought so hard to get here. I wanted to be the mentor I'd needed when I was starting out, to open doors for others the way I'd finally learned to open them for myself. Meanwhile, my own business acumen was growing. I learned to read financial statements like a second language, to negotiate contracts with confidence, to spot opportunities others missed. I made mistakes, of course. Everyone does. But I learned from them, adapted, and kept moving forward. I started to see myself not just as a survivor, but as a leader, an innovator, a builder. Marcus's presence in the building faded into the background. His company renewed their lease again, this time with a longer term and a request for more space. He sent a polite email thanking me for my professionalism, and I responded in kind. There was no animosity left, just a quiet acknowledgement of the past and a mutual respect for the present. I realized that I no longer needed to prove anything to him or to anyone else. My success spoke for itself. As spring approached, I took on a new challenge, expanding my portfolio. With the building running smoothly and a strong team in place, I started looking for my next investment. I toured properties across the city, met with brokers and investors, ran the numbers late into the night. It was exhilarating, a reminder that growth doesn't end when you reach a goal, it just changes shape. During this time, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference. Standing on stage, looking out at a sea of faces, some eager, some skeptical, all hungry for inspiration, I felt a surge of gratitude.
I shared my story, not just the victories, but the setbacks, the doubts, the moments when I'd wanted to give up. I talked about the importance of resilience, of community, of believing in yourself even when no one else does. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, and I knew I'd made a difference. After the conference, women approached me with their own stories of being overlooked, underestimated, pushed aside. They thanked me for my honesty, for showing them that it was possible to rise above, to reclaim their power, to build something lasting. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about me, it was about all of us, about the collective strength we find when we lift each other up. Back at the building, I continued to invest in the community. I started a wellness program, yoga classes, meditation sessions, mental health workshops, because I knew firsthand how important it was to care for the whole person, not just the employee. The response was overwhelming. People told me they felt seen, supported, valued in ways they never had before. One evening, as I walked through the building, I paused outside the conference room once more. The lights were on, the room filled with laughter and conversation. I watched for a moment, unseen, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what I'd built. Not just a business, but a legacy. A place where people could thrive, where dreams could take root, where no one ever had to feel small or powerless again.
As summer returned, the city pulsed with life, and the building seemed to hum with its own energy. The rooftop garden I'd started as a small experiment was now a lush oasis, tended by tenants who found solace in the dirt and the sun. People gathered there for lunch, for brainstorming sessions, for quiet moments of reflection. It became a symbol of what we'd created together, a space that grew and flourished because people cared enough to nurture it. I found myself reflecting more often, not just on how far I'd come, but on the journey itself. The pain of that Thursday, the sting of public humiliation, had faded into something else, a kind of gratitude. Without it, I might never have found the courage to take such a bold leap, to risk everything for a chance at something better. I realized that sometimes the worst moments in our lives are the ones that set us free. The mentorship program continued to thrive. I watched as young women who'd once been shy and uncertain now led meetings, pitched ideas, and negotiated contracts with confidence. Some of them moved on to new opportunities, others stayed and grew within the building's community. Each success felt like a personal victory, a reminder that the impact of our actions ripples outward in ways we can't always see. My relationship with my sister deepened even further. We traveled together, explored new cities, tried new things. She started her own business, inspired by my journey, and I became her biggest cheerleader. We celebrated each other's wins, supported each other through setbacks, and laughed more than we ever had before. Family, I realized, was the foundation that made everything else possible. One afternoon, as I was reviewing plans for a new expansion, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a former tenant, someone who'd moved out months ago to start a company in another city. The letter was handwritten, the words careful and sincere. Ava, I wanted to thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. The time I spent in your building changed my life. I learned what it means to be part of a community, to take risks, to lead with kindness. I hope I can build something as special as you have. I read the letter twice, then a third time, tears pricking my eyes. It was easy to get caught up in the day-to-day challenges, the endless to-do lists, the pressure to keep growing. But moments like this reminded me why I'd started, why I kept going, why it all mattered. As the sun set over the city, I stood on the rooftop, looking out at the skyline. The building below me buzzed with life. Meetings, celebrations, quiet moments of connection. I thought about the future, about the risks and rewards still to come, about the people I'd yet to meet and the stories I'd yet to write.
I knew there would be challenges ahead, there always are, but I also knew that I was ready. I'd face down humiliation, fear, and doubt and come out stronger on the other side. I'd built something real, something lasting, something that would endure long after I was gone. And as the sunlights flickered on one by one, I felt a deep sense of peace. I was exactly where I was meant to be.
The days grew longer, and with them came a sense of quiet confidence that settled into my bones. I no longer woke up dreading what the day might bring. Instead, I looked forward to the small surprises. A new tenant moving in, a thank you note left on my desk, a spontaneous lunch with my team. The building had become a living, breathing testament to resilience, and I felt its pulse in every corner. One morning, as I made my usual rounds, I stopped by the lobby to find a group of tenants gathered around the mural. Someone had added a new detail, a small golden phoenix rising from the painted cityscape. It was subtle, almost hidden, but unmistakable. I smiled, recognizing the symbol for what it was: rebirth, transformation, the power to rise from the ashes. It was a message, not just to me, but to everyone who had ever felt broken or beaten down. We could all begin again. I took a photo and sent it to my sister, who replied instantly, "That's you, Ava. That's all of us." I thought about how far we'd come, how much we'd grown, and how the journey was never really over. There would always be new challenges, new setbacks, new opportunities to prove ourselves. But I was no longer afraid. I'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway. The mentorship program continued to expand, drawing interest from women across the city. We started hosting quarterly panels, inviting leaders from different industries to share their stories. The conference room that had once been a place of humiliation was now filled with laughter, applause, and the kind of honest conversation that changes lives. I watched as mentees became mentors, as confidence blossomed, as dreams took shape and took flight. One afternoon, after a particularly inspiring panel, a young woman approached me. She was nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Sinclair, I just wanted to say thank you. I was ready to give up on this industry, but your story, it made me believe I could do it too." I smiled, remembering how many times I'd needed to hear those words myself. You can, and when you do, don't forget to help the next woman up. That night, I sat in my office, the city lights twinkling outside, and wrote in my journal. I wrote about the journey, the pain, the triumph, the lessons learned. I wrote about Marcus, about forgiveness, about letting go. I wrote about the building, about the community we'd built, about the legacy I hope to leave behind. And I wrote about the future, about the dreams I still carried, about the woman I was still becoming. I realized that the story I'd lived was bigger than any one moment, any one setback, any one victory. It was a tapestry woven from threads of hope and heartbreak, courage and doubt, failure and redemption. And every day, I had the chance to add a new thread, to shape the pattern, to decide what kind of story I wanted to tell. As the months passed, I continued to invest in the building, in the people, in myself. I took risks, made mistakes, celebrated wins both big and small. I traveled, learned, grew. I watched as the community flourished, as new leaders emerged, as the building became a beacon for others who needed a fresh start. And through it all, I never forgot where I started. I never forgot the sting of that Thursday, the humiliation, the anger, the fear.
But I also never forgot the lesson it taught me, that no one else gets to decide your worth, that you can lose everything and still find a way to rise, that the power to change your life is always, always within your grasp. On the anniversary of the day I bought the building, I hosted a celebration on the rooftop. Tenants, friends, family, and mentees gathered under strings of lights, sharing food, stories, and laughter. As the sun set and the city glowed below, I raised a glass and thanked everyone for being part of the journey. I looked around at the faces, some familiar, some new, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to my eyes. When the party was over and the rooftop was quiet, I stood alone for a moment, breathing in the night air. I thought about the future, about the challenges and adventures still to come. I knew there would be hard days, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But I also knew that I was ready. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been. I turned to leave, pausing for one last look at the city that had tested me, shaped me, and finally set me free. I smiled, knowing that whatever came next, I would face it with open eyes and an open heart. Because this was my story, my building, my life. And I was just getting started.